Okay, so for our next study, our PhD student Andreas Tingvad has spent countless hours in our laboratories as well as in parking lots to produce real-world data on battery degradation from V2G services. As previously mentioned, unfortunately Andreas will not be able to join us today, so presenting on his behalf we have Bach, Mattia and Lisa. So please.
Yes, thanks a lot, Peter. Yeah, I'll try to highlight the most important results and also definitely get to the battery degradation. So the way I would like to divide this presentation is basically in two parts. So the first one, I would like to spend a few words on the more lucrative aspects. So how and where we can make money with electric vehicles by looking at a different type of services, whether it should be by taking advantage of variability of energy prices throughout the day, or whether it should be to assist the distribution system operator, or whether it should be by doing frequency control. And then I'll spend a few words on the modeling of the degradation and the measurement that we did in order to validate those models. I'll wrap up with some conclusion later. Before jumping into the services, just to give a little bit of a picture on how we can use the electrical vehicle, so how we can interface the electrical vehicle with the grid. So we know that the electrical vehicle is storage on wheels, basically, and we can interface with the electrical grid in two ways. So on the left side of the slide, you can see an external charger, such as the one that we have been extensively using during the demonstration. That one in the picture is 10 kilowatt, but according to the standard, so the CHAdeMO standard, which is the only one that supports bidirectional power flow nowadays, we can go up to 50, potentially 100 kilowatt. But we need power electronic outside the vehicle. And that gives us the possibility of charging and discharging the vehicle. Otherwise, if you look at the right side of the picture, we can use an external charge controller as the one that we built here at ETU. So that's the one from our lab. And then we can leverage on the onboard charger and potentially charge up to 43 kilowatts. That's what the standards say. But of course, the key constraint is on the charger size. So if the charger on board is 3.7 kilowatt, we can't charge more than 3.7 kilowatt, but we can modulate down this charging level. So taking in consideration this example of a 3.7 kilowatt charging level, the first type of analysis that we did was to take, again, our island of Bornholms, and we took the whole island. So on the island, there are 17,000 vehicles. We just decided that let's get rid of all the conventional vehicles and let's replace them with electric vehicles. So 17,000 vehicles. And we have been trying to keep the same driving pattern that we have on the island. Then we say, okay, we want to charge according to the natural driving pattern that Lisa was discussing before. And we could end up in some situation where we would overload the cable that is interconnecting island to Sweden. So in order to avoid overloading, and that means also replacing the cable, we define some smart charging strategies based on an optimization algorithm that would look at the variability of the energy price, so of the L-spot price throughout the day, and not just a smart charging, but also potentially using a bidirectional charging to do like basically a pumped hydro system, so to charge when it's cheap and discharge when it's expensive. The, let's say, good news is that by just using smart charging, we can basically avoid all the overloading of the cable. And that would, of course, have a benefit for the society because there would not be need for reinforcing the cable. The, let's say, less good news is that by using the bidirectional, so charging and discharging, we don't really get any big advantage in terms of saving compared to the simple smart charging. Actually, it's just 1% extra. And in any case, we are talking about 45 euros per year, given the current variability of energy price. And just keep in mind that even though we are speculating on the energy price, we are still taking in consideration all taxes. So the taxes are still included in the overall price. So let's say not very encouraging news in that sense. Let's move then to the distribution grid service. So here, in order to get the value for a distribution grid service, it's a bit more tricky because we don't really have a market at the distribution system. So we had to define, we have to be a little bit creative and define some ad hoc solution. So the approach that we used was to say, if we have to replace the potentially overloaded component, transformer, cable, and so on, what if we use the flexibility of the vehicle and we value this flexibility, basically the saving that the DSO would have in replacing or postponing the replacement of the transformer? Long story cut short, also in this case, we don't really have a lot of value. I mean, our estimate for an average customer would be in the range of 10 euro per year. There will be the additional societal benefit of not, let's say, putting a larger transformer. But again, we are not really getting a lot of money for that. Where the cake, let's say, it's a bit more interesting, it's, as we probably all of us know, on the frequency control. So the frequency market is quite lucrative. Prices are very generous. And by doing, let's say, this simple case of taking the 10 kilowatt bidirectional charger, having the vehicle providing 15 hours of bidirectional service, we could get on an average year a capacity payment that is way more than 1,000 euro. There would be some losses to be paid because those chargers, even though are good, are not ideal. So you have losses while charging and discharging back and forth. So that has to be taken into account. Still, the picture is quite interesting. Now, before we get a little bit further, what do we mean just by frequency control? Just to recap very quickly about that. So by frequency control, we mean the action, so the operation to balance generation or consumption unit in order to modulate consumption and generation according to the electrical frequency. So if we take a bidirectional charger, it would basically mean that if we are in an under frequency situation, we would discharge the vehicle into the grid and the other way around. But this kind of operation we can also do with a unidirectional charging by basically charging less if the frequency goes down or charging more if the frequency goes up. So focusing very briefly on a unidirectional charger, this is an example from the charger that we installed at the hotel, Griffin Hotel in Bornholms. And this is an example of how we can measure the frequency. So that's the red line in the plot, and then adjust the charging current accordingly. And the vehicle can provide this quite fast. We are in basically a few seconds. Going back to the bidirectional case, because it's more interesting, because since we have bidirectionality, we can do basically an infinite number of charges and discharges. So we can use the vehicle way longer than compared to a unidirectional charging. Let's say the interesting point would be that the frequency all in all tends to be balanced throughout the day. So we have the same amount of events of under frequency as over frequency. So ideally you could say you keep on charging and discharging the same amount of energy, and ideally you would end up with a state of charge that is constant throughout the day. That would be nice. Unfortunately, that's not really the case because we have losses, and because the frequency, even though it's balanced throughout the day, may not be balanced throughout several hours. So you may end up in a situation that the different spaghetti that you see here in the diagram could violate the state of charge limitation of the vehicle. We estimated with that 14 hours of frequency regulation, 10 kilowatt, 88% of the days we would have a violation that is at least for a few minutes, not necessarily too much, but at least for a few minutes. So if we want to fulfill completely, so 100% of the cases, the bid requirements, then we can't be too greedy. So we can't bid 10 kilowatt, we have to bid a little bit less and keep this margin available for correcting the state of charge if we are getting either too charge or too discharge. As I said, we have approximately some losses for the energy that we have to pay. And the interesting aspect is also to make an assessment of how many cycles this operation would bring us. And for a 40 kilowatt hour vehicle, that would be 150 full cycles. Remember this number because it will become quite important when discussing the degradation later on. Let's get now actually to the degradation itself. So first of all, we did some modeling and simulation analysis. Then we are in the lucky situation that we have those vehicles at Frederiksberg Forsyning that have been providing frequency control for 4 years. So we have been measuring their capacity in order to understand whether our models are behaving properly or not. So the first point is to discuss how we model the degradation. So we took as an input the outside temperature, that's quite a key factor, and of course the power that has been used for driving and providing frequency control. And based on a dynamic model, we estimated the energy flow and the battery degradation. In terms of getting a bit inside the modeling perspective of the battery, we used, let's say, a traditional Thevenin equivalent circuit. We estimated our own thermal dynamic of the system, and of course, we computed the degradation dynamic based on the chemistry that is on those Nissan Leaf specifically. The degradation dynamic depends mostly on, can be mostly divided in terms of calendar. So degradation simply by passing of time, and is also affected by temperature and state of charge, or cycle degradation that depends mostly on how many cycling we are using the battery for. So here you find some examples. So what we did for the first modeling approach was to say, we want to compare how the battery is degrading if we just use the vehicle for driving. And then we want to see if we add on top of the driving frequency provision, how much would it be the additional degradation that we get because of the frequency provision. So the first plot that you see on the left top would be the, let's say, standard driving behavior here in Denmark. We are driving in the morning, we are driving back in the evening every day, a certain number of kilometers. Then we added 3 different cases based on historical frequency, the same one that, as I said, we are sharing on the website, for DK1, which is continental Europe, basically, Japan, Tokyo area, and DK2, which is the Nordic area. And you can see that variability, and that basically means the power in Japan and DK2 is larger compared to DK1 because the frequency tend to be more variable. But all in all, if you look at the plots on the right, you can appreciate that even though we are using the vehicle quite extensively to provide this frequency control, the overall state of health after 5 years, in the first case, is going from around 94% down to 93%, a little bit more for DK2, a little bit less for DK1. And with an average state of charge of 75%, the values are 4 or 5% less. This of the average state of charge is actually quite important because it basically means how much we are willing to charge every morning the vehicle. So actually keeping the vehicle not completely charged every morning, it's way better in terms of state of health, and it's overcompensating additional degradation that would be caused by additional frequency control. So getting now to some numbers, so how this translates basically in money in the end. Right, so we took again our case of a 40 kilowatt hour vehicle, 13 hours of frequency provision, and we estimated the degradation cost over 5 years, assuming that our end of life of the battery is a state of health of 50%. Now, you see again, we have these 2 cases for a 50% mean state of charge and 75% mean state of charge. Now, the cost that we would have for the battery just by driving, it would be around 876 euro over 5 years in one case, or more than 1,000 euro over 5 years in the other case. And just the additional loss of value because of frequency control would basically go from around 100 euro in the DK1 case to a little bit more than 200 euro in the DK2 case. And that's again over 5 years. So you can see that, I mean, it's a decent amount of loss, but it's not insanely large. Now, getting to the measurement themselves for the degradation, how we have been trying to estimate the life of the battery. So what we have been doing was performing some full charges and discharges of the vehicle in order to see how much energy is left inside the vehicle. Now, this diagram may look a little bit complicated, but if you start from the left, as we were saying at the beginning, you can basically charge the vehicle either with a DC external charger or with a charge controller. And the point of this charge controller is that you would use the internal AC-DC converter, which may change in terms of efficiency, and we may not really be able to measure directly. So we rather prefer to use the external charger because then all conversion losses are outside the vehicle, and everything that we get inside the vehicle is measurable. And we could say we have basically almost no losses because in terms of joule losses inside the battery, they would be minimal because we are charging at a C rating that is half C, even less for the 30 kilowatt hour vehicle. And any kind of loss that is necessary to supply the computer on board or the 12-volt battery we are measuring as well. So that would be the measurement point B and A. So basically, by having measurement on the point A and on the point B, we can estimate the true energy that can go inside the vehicle. So we can have the good picture of the real energy. And you see here the example in our lab. So we have been measuring a certain number of vehicles. The one that you see here in the lab, it's a Nissan Leaf 40 kilowatt-hour, which has not been driving nor providing frequency control at all. Then we have the 30 kilowatt-hour. So we have 2 Nissan Leaf that are in Bornholms that have been used for driving and for providing frequency control. And then we have the 24 kilowatt-hour Leaf. So we have 10 of them at utility in Frederiksberg and 2 of them again in Bornholms. And all of them have been providing driving and frequency control. And let's say the most valuable, so to speak, are the one in Frederiksberg because they've been providing frequency control now for 4 years. So they are getting quite old. So the result, you see, I just reported the values for the cars in Frederiksberg Forsyning. So that's those 10 cars from 1 to 10. Now, how we should read this plot? This plot is reporting a solid line that would be the estimated degradation that our model would give in the moment that we consider a 24 kilowatt-hour battery with a bid of 3.2 kilowatt for frequency control over 14 hours a day. And then the dots are the measurement that we have been performing. So the energy capacity that we have been measuring every 6 months, more or less, starting when they were, let's say, starting 2 years ago, a little bit than 2 years ago. So the good news is that, as you can see, the model or the measurement are matching quite well the model. So that make us get a good confidence that the model is properly tailored. You may remember actually that this state of health after 5 years would be 85%. And some of you may ask, why is now 85% while before in the slides that you show it was 95 or 90%? Good point. You have to remember that in that case, those calculations were based on a 40 kilowatt-hour vehicle providing frequency control, while here we have 24 kilowatt-hour vehicles providing frequency control. And in both cases, we are getting those 10 kilowatt, more or less, of power bid. So another important aspect is basically how much power we are bidding with reference to the energy capacity that is on the vehicle. So as you can imagine, the larger will be the power bid with reference to the energy capacity, the higher will be the number of cycles, and that means also the associated degradation. So all in all, summing up the results, we had that profitability from smart charging based on a market approach would not really bring a lot of money, let's say 50 euros per year. Profitability from smart charging and providing grid services on a distribution level, that's even less. Where the cake, as I said, is interesting is on the primary frequency control, but in this case, if we are using a bidirectional charger, we need to have also the external charger, and of course, they have a cost associated with that. When providing these frequency control services, particularly, it's important the ratio of the bit power with reference to the energy capacity that we have on board. We need to be aware that even though the frequency tend to be balanced, the state of charge would need to be kept under control, and we would need to reserve some capacity in order to correct the balance throughout the operation. As I said, the additional wear due to frequency control amounts to only a few percent, 1–2% extra compared to the natural foreseen degradation because of driving. And even with all low electricity prices, losses, at least nowadays with those type of chargers, are quite significant, and they do have an impact on the overall profitability. That doesn't mean that new chargers will, will definitely be better and more efficient, and definitely will have less losses. Degradation from frequency control, as we said, it's rather low, but definitely should be taken into account in order to get a good picture. Also, in this case, you have all the references in case you want to go deeper into the subject. So thanks for the attention now, and of course, welcome any question.
Thank you very much, Mattia, also for catching us up on the agenda. And also thank you for the attendees. There's a lot of questions now in the Q&A. Just to say, I have already answered and dismissed some of the questions, but in fact we are saving them, and I might bring back some of the questions for the wrap-up session in the end of the day. The first question is from RC Argo, who asks, with these small cycles that perhaps in particular we see from some of these frequency services, would that help on the battery degradation, do you think?
Let's say the key point is how many cycles you are providing. There is a little bit of a threshold on how you measure the cycle. So how large should the variation be around an average state of charge before you actually start really counting those variations as a real cycle, or rather just as a small fluctuation that are not really providing any real cycle? So how large this variation would be, then let's say you would start counting those as bringing degradation or not. Let's say on the conservative approach, you would just integrate any current going back and forth. So just keep on counting cycles, and then you are on the safe side that you are considering degradation processes. But depending on the chemistry, if those fluctuations are very small, they may not, let's say, weight the same in terms of degradation. And that basically brings us to the point of how much power we want to beat with reference to the battery capacity. Because again, if we take those 10 kilowatt over a 24 kilowatt hour, the fluctuation can be rather large. But if we take those 10 kilowatt compared to 100 kilowatt hour, those fluctuations can be actually very negligible in that sense. One important aspect in general is we should get away as much as possible from high state of charge on average. And that is definitely bringing more benefit rather than worrying too much about the cycles.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the next question has actually been posted by a few. We have here on the top, when you have to consider the investment cost of the V2G charger, which is, let's say, larger perhaps than your regular smart AC charger, how do you think about the payback time or the ratio between the costs of the two types of chargers?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair question. I mean, if you want to make a quick and dirty calculation, you can get this 1,000 euro here in Denmark per year as a profit. A 10 kilowatt bidirectional charger of that type, let's say at a certain point it could cost 5,000 euro. Okay, so all in all, you would say in 5 years it's gonna pay back. Then you would expect that after 5 years it's not gonna break down, right? So maybe if it has a life that is 10 years or a little bit more, then I think you are gonna make a good deal. Definitely, I mean, there are also few things to consider. So one point is that these 1,000 euro are also taking advantage of a couple of, let's say, particular conditions. The first one is that we are paying industrial price, which at least in Denmark is way less than domestic price. That means that the losses that you have in the charger, which, as I said, could become smaller in your charger, are you pay basically half. So instead of paying 200 euros, you could end up as a domestic customer to pay 400 euros per year. That's the first point. The second point is that we are assuming that energy that you buy and energy that you sell will be paid the same. And that may not really be the case, because typically energy that you sell into the grid will be paid less than the energy that you buy, even if you are considering the industrial price, which is a reduced price. So if you start keeping that into account, those aspects would actually weigh more than the investment cost of the V2G charge. But let's say there is a good prospect, and you could also say that in the future, frequency services could become, it's a bit debatable, because I mean, in the moment that you have more units providing frequency service, that could bring the price down because of more competition. But at the same time, more renewable will also drive up the need for frequency reserve, and that could increase the prices. Where, let's say, the balance will be, that's of course difficult to say.
Thank you very much, Mattia. There's a bunch of good questions here, but let's take the next one. How do you think this profitability that we found in Denmark will translate to other countries? So providing frequency regulations in other countries.
Yes, that's a valid point. So the let's say in that sense, the frequency case that we should consider is the one that we have been analyzing in DK1, because that's the same frequency pattern that you would have in other European countries. Now, I'm not up to date, but I believe that not all European countries actually have a market for frequency control. So I don't know. I know that not everywhere you can actually you don't have a market, so you can't really participate. That's the first point. And even if you have a market, the entry level, so how much power you need to bid as a single bid, can be quite large. I mean, here in Denmark, we are a bit lucky because the entry level, if I'm not mistaken, is 300 kilowatt. So in order to provide a bid, you don't need that many vehicles to be pooled, basically. But for other countries where there are markets, the minimum bid could be 1 megawatt or even 5 megawatt. So you need also larger number of vehicles to participate. I mean, you would not necessarily participate, you as a private person, of course. It would always be an aggregating a V2G service provider, as NUVVE in this case, providing this kind of service. But let's say the variability of the frequency would be less in European, continental European countries. So it could be more interesting if the market framework is the same as in Denmark, because you are paid by power availability, but then you work based on how much frequency deviation, that means how much energy you are bidding into the system, and a lower frequency variability basically determine less effort, so to speak.
Okay, I'm trying to squeeze in one more question before the break. I really like this question, and it's something we have addressed also at previous like end seminars. Why would doing this frequency control not potentially provide the same grid issues as described earlier? Martin Christensen asks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is definitely one of the cases that we were saying of synchronizing the units. So if we take again the case that Lisa was describing before, I mean, if you just charge the vehicle, you have a sort of unsynchronized human behavior, because everyone behaves in a different way. But in the moment that you start using the vehicle and synchronize their operation, because they start acting all according to a same signal, which would be the frequency in this case, then definitely that's going to be a problem. And then it opened a big box on how to coordinate a service between a distribution system operator and a transmission system operator. So the TSO would be requiring this frequency service, and then the DSO could end up in a situation that this grid is compromised. So who's going to have priority in that sense? And let's say we can discuss for hours about that. I'll leave it a little bit vague, but I have my personal opinion that I will not share now in order not to upset DSOs, so to speak.
All right. I think with that, we have way more good questions than we have time, but I'll archive them. And again, hopefully we can bring some questions back for the wrap-up session. For now, I think we'll just have a very brief break, hopefully enough for you to take a cup of coffee. So if we could start already, approximately 10:25 local time, we'll have a brief break now. Thank you very much.